Chicago Bears rookie minicamp gave us good insight into Azie Trapillo's transition back to left tackle, Shemar Turner's spot in this Bears defensive line, and why it might still be a little bit before anybody's winning or losing jobs, at least up front.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. On the show today, we get some updates from Bears rookie minicamp on Ozzy Trapilo and why the move back to left tackle may be a little easier and smoother than we would have thought at first based on some of the work he's been putting in behind the scenes. We'll also hear about defensive tackle Shemar Turner and where Dennis Allen sees him on the defensive line, what kind of body composition they're going for there, and why I still think it leaves a big question mark up front for his unit. And lastly, we'll hear from Ben Johnson about how he's watching these battles and how maybe we need to be patient and wait a little longer and not jump to any conclusions about who might start winning these battles very soon. It's going to take some time and be wide open for a little while yet. But I think I was most fascinated coming out of the weekend of second-round pick Azie Trapilo working at left tackle. We knew that Colston Loveland, your first-round pick, not participating in full drills because of the injury that he's recovering from in his shoulder. But, we knew wide receiver Luther Burden, he's fast and will look really good in these kind of situations. But seeing the left tackle, Trapilo, working back on that left side for spending the last 2 seasons at right tackle at Boston College, it's been a quick transition for him. It's been a smooth transition for him. And it's something where after we hear him here explain how he's been preparing for this long before the Bears even drafted him, it sure makes a lot of sense, and I think seems like it was pretty clearly and obviously the plan all along here, that yes, he'll be competing with Karan Amagaji, and then when Braxton Jones is healthy, the winner of that will most likely kind of compete with Braxton Jones at that point in the process. But I sure think Trapilo's got the early leg up here, at least over Karan Amagaji, and if he keeps it up at this pace, if he's as far ahead as it seems like he is, he's got a legit shot to start week 1 for this Bears on the offensive line. So first, let's hear from him about this transition. After starting at right tackle the last 2 seasons at Boston College, but he had played left tackle, his sophomore year there before moving over to right side because they had some changes on their offensive line. But all along the way, even though he was playing right tackle, he always made sure to stay ready if in case Boston College would need to move him to left tackle, or in case he went to the NFL and was drafted by a team that wanted him to play left tackle. Here's how he explains that process.
How did some of those left tackle movements, techniques that you're doing today feel to you? Did it feel natural?
Yeah, throughout college, I knew that I wanted to play in the NFL. So doing so, you have to be versatile. That's the quickest way to get on the field. So, after practice, even though I was the right tackle the last 2 years in college, working left, making sure that it's still smooth, still feels good, especially after the season. I was working more left than right just because catching up for lost time. So it felt good today.
What do you foresee as the toughest hurdle you're going to have to overcome going from the right side to the left side?
That's a good one. I don't really know if there's any specific obstacles that I'm sort of thinking of. I've touched upon this before, but in a way, if you're more used to playing right tackle at live speed, and you're still consistent with left, you feel good at left, it's almost easier when you're learning new technique because you don't just get into that flow state. Your habits are all coming back. You're hyper-focused on every movement because it's not as natural. So, in a way, it feels smoother. It feels easier to adapt to this new coaching style, new techniques, and all the above. So,
what gives you the most confidence that you can learn all of that and do it at the NFL level immediately?
You're saying play it left?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just being with the coaches here, they wouldn't be here if they weren't great at their jobs, right? And the same goes for the players. So getting with the older guys, working with them, I'm not the only guy that's had to play multiple positions. So just picking their brains, seeing how it works, working after practice with them, for example, things like that. And then really just relying on the coaches, spending a lot of time here, and working as hard as I can to be the best that I can.
I do quickly want to try and clarify a little bit of what he said at the end there, because I think his explanation wasn't the most straightforward, but I think I understand what he was going after there. Where essentially, like, where you're saying, well, the transition is actually easier to learn technique while you're going to this new position, and the way he kind of talks around it is tricky. But basically, the idea he's saying there is like, if you're going from college to the NFL, right, and say he was still playing right tackle where he'd been playing the last couple of years, like that's so automatic for him that like it would be harder in some ways to try and like adapt the ways he had been doing it to this new way, because it's sort of like second nature muscle memory. He said talk about the flow state, right, where he's just like he's so ingrained in how he played right tackle a certain way that sometimes that can be kind of trickier to like disrupt your flow of how you've kind of always done it and to try and adjust and change that. Whereas like if he's already learning left tackle again and sort of like relearning a quote unquote new position again, he already has to think very carefully about every step as he's trying to like switch over to left tackle, right? He has to be very intentional about it. So it's not that hard to then do left tackle in a slightly different way, because left tackle is already a slightly different adjustment from what he had to do at right tackle, right? So he's like, if I'm already changing things, it's easier to just change everything as opposed to like having me change a few specific things at right tackle when I'm so used to doing that one specific way. He doesn't have a full like used to doing it one specific way at left tackle because he's mostly been a right tackle. But he's been doing enough work at left tackle that it's not starting from scratch and going from ground zero. It's just been about trying to maintain some flexibility there so that he would have some sort of starting ground there without being fully ingrained in it, that it becomes more difficult to change those habits. And so all of this leads me back to the idea that, after the Bears drafted Azie Trapilo, Ryan Poles was kind of coy about, well, you're going to move Darnold right to left tackle, you're going to move Trapilo. He's like, yeah, well, we're still going to figure that out and we'll let you know. Like, come on. They always knew Ozzy Trapilo was going to play left tackle. They absolutely knew that Trapilo had been practicing at left tackle and preparing at left tackle this whole time. That was not news to the Chicago Bears. And so they drafted a rookie offensive tackle who's been trying to play both left and right tackle, or they have a veteran right tackle who's only been playing right tackle. Like, sure, maybe it was never say never, but I think all along the plan was always for Trapilo to play left tackle, and it didn't seem like there was much of a likelihood of Darnold Wright ever really moving to that side, even though Ryan Poles probably left the door open verbally there a little bit more than actually was how things played out in reality. But hey, it's settled now. You know who your 5 offensive line starters are going to be, and then it's Trapilo versus Amagaji versus Braxton Jones for the other spot. I think at this point, that's Trapilo's, at least between Trapilo and Amagaji, I'll take the second round rookie as the betting favorite there, and then him versus Braxton Jones kind of depends on how quickly Braxton Jones gets healthy. But if Jones misses the first couple of weeks of training camp or all of training camp, like his lack of availability could be enough to where Trapilo takes it and runs with it and never really ends up giving it back. So going to be interesting to watch his development throughout OTAs, minicamp, and then training camp when the pads go on. Similar kind of thing for Shemar Turner on the defensive line, where he's got an opportunity now to play the position he played this past season in college, but he's got some versatility as well. And there's some thought about, does he kick out to the edge? Does he stay inside at defensive tackle? Dennis Allen seemed pretty definitive about where he wants things for now. And then we'll talk about how they might change in the future next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Do you ever look at your bank account and wonder, well, wait a minute, where did all that money go? Between dining out and online shopping or entertainment, whatever, it can be easy to lose track, but that's where Monarch Money comes in. Monarch Money is your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. It's not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all your accounts and stop managing your money and start building wealth. I have the Monarch Money app on my phone, and I love it because it keeps everything in one place. I used to have multiple apps. I had one for my bank account, one for my credit card, one for my retirement account, one for my other investments. But with Monarch Money, it's all in the same spot. So I can check my finances, track my spending, and plan long-term goals all in one easy-to-use, super intuitive app. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, promo code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first 12 months. So we know Azie Trapilo is on the fast track for the left tackle position. Not guaranteed a starting job, but certainly well on his way towards that competition. It was a little less clear about Shemar Turner on the interior. We hypothesized in this podcast that maybe he could end up rotating in at defensive end and being maybe not purely the number 3 defensive end, but there's been talk about Javon Dexter playing some end and Turner can play some end, and maybe the Bears can kind of just get a few different players involved there to fill that spot on the defensive line, because Shemar Turner had played edge rusher defensive end his second to last year in college. I believe it was his junior year, and had a really productive season. But then his final year in college, they bumped him. They had him gain weight and kicked him inside a defensive tackle, and he was a little less productive. I think he was also dealing with an injury during some of that time, and there's more to dig into there. But nonetheless, it left some ambiguity about, okay, do you leave him at defensive tackle where you already have a lot of other talented young players in Dexter, and I guess Pickens is still a work in progress, but then you got Billings and Greg Jarrett's kind of a loaded defensive tackle spot? Or do you draft him as a defensive tackle, then move him to edge where the need is? But, why not draft a true edge rusher there? He's got the versatility to do both. He's said since the Bears drafted him that, hey, I'll play wherever they want me to. I just want to be on the field and getting after the quarterback, et cetera. Like, it's all the things you want. So where then does that leave us? We've been kind of looking for an answer here, and Dennis Allen, the Bears defensive coordinator, finally gave one to us, at least for now, like in the short term, an answer.
With Sheamar, I know that he's talked about, his versatility is something that he really, holds dear. Do you see him as an edge? Like, how will you kind of determine how?
Well, look, I think the first thing we got to do is we got to play him in at defensive tackle, and let him learn there, let him develop there, both as a 3 technique and as a nose, and then we'll worry about, trying to see that flexibility. From a skill set standpoint, yeah, he's got some flexibility. We'll just have to see what he can learn and how quickly he can learn and adapt to what we're doing.
It makes sense that a rookie defensive lineman would come in, and you wouldn't want to ask him to play a bunch of different positions all at once and say, hey, master all 4 of these things and then get back to us, right? I like the idea of saying, hey, let's focus you in on one spot. And, sort of, I guess he's a defense-free technique and nose tackle, which is kind of 2 spots, so we'll give him that. But it's sometimes the responsibilities at either spot can be the same, or they can be sort of flip-flopped. Like, if the run play goes to the right, then if you're on the front side or the back side, like, there's some different spots where in any given play, they can have alternating responsibilities, where on some plays they'll have some responsibilities, and on the other plays they'll have the inverse, and they can kind of alternate back and forth. It's not important to get too lost in the weeds there. The point being, like, those are similar enough that he can handle those 2 spots at first, whereas the edge, it's a very different players you're going up against. It's different responsibilities in the running game and as pass rushers, and maybe just saying, hey, let's start here, get good and comfortable with this one thing that you've been doing most recently, and then from there we can talk about adding things onto it, right? But it's more about sticking to one position, whereas like with Ozzy Trapilo, right, they are moving him, but he's sticking there, right? They're not asking Ozzy to practice at left and right tackle. They're just saying, no, you're a left tackle now, do this. And for Shemar Turner, it's, you're a defensive tackle now, let's do this. And then at some point you could talk about kicking him to the outside. But I get the impression there, based on everything we've learned, that it probably isn't going to be a big part of Shemar Turner's rookie season even. Like, I know he says, learn this and then we'll try the edge. Like, that's not to say that he's not going to get any moving around there, but I don't think he's going to play a significant edge role. Kind of like Javon Dexter last year, where there were a few snaps he lined up out there, but he wasn't like an actual member of the defensive end rotation. And what really keys me in on that is where they want to have Shemar Turner's body physically. Turner did a press conference after rookie minicamp, or during rookie minicamp, and was asked, well, they kept trying to ask him, where are you going to play? He's like, I'll play anywhere, wherever they need me. But I don't remember which reporter was like, well, what do they want your body to be like? What kind of weight do they want you playing at? And he said, They said they don't want me above 300 pounds. They want me in like the 290 to 295 pound range. And that to me says he's staying at defensive tackle for a while because yes, you can line up at edge rusher at 295 pounds, but that's not necessarily a sustainable full-time role at that size. Yes, Dennis Allen uses bigger, heavier, longer defensive ends, but even like Cam Jordan, the biggest of the big defensive ends, I think he was 285, and that was like the biggest, heaviest edge rusher in the NFL. You know, like the far and away most oversized guy who's a special enough talent to be able to play that position at that weight. And so they're not going to have a rookie play that position at an even higher weight. Like he's just not going to have the speed at that weight to get past NFL offensive tackles. Yeah, maybe he can bull rush there every once in a while, right? But it's not a sustainable spot. And it's going to be hard to get out in front on running it. Like there's a lot of reasons why 295, that kind of range is just going to be tricky there. If they said, you know what, Sheamar, we want you to get down to 280, 275 and think you could play both at that weight, well, then all of a sudden, that tells you a little bit more about the versatility. But they're not going to keep Shemar Turner at 290 or 295 right now. And then at training camp, have him lose weight to play defensive end. I think when Dennis Allen says he's playing defensive tackle for now, we'll talk about edge in the future. Like that's like next off season, he could lose weight and maybe change position. But I can't imagine that whatever body weight they try and get him at right now in May is going to be different than the body weight, like largely different. Obviously, a few pounds here or there, whatever, summer conditioning versus in season, sure. But like they're not going to have him change his body composition drastically between what they want him at now and what they want him at in week one. They're just not going to change his whole body in training camp to learn a new position. Then like they're going to try and keep him at this body and at this position. So I wouldn't expect Turner to have a significant role at the edge rusher spot for the Bears. So then we're back to the same question then of like, who is? Are Grady Jarrett, Andrew Billings, Javon Dexter, Zach Pickens, and Shemar Turner all going to play defensive tackle this season? Is there going to be playing time for all those guys? Is Zach Pickens going to be a healthy scratch there? Like how they try and figure that out is a big question. And then who's going to be that number 3 defensive end behind Montez Sweat and Dio Odangbo? I just can't yet believe that it's going to just be Austin Booker as a 5th round pick last year. He flashed. There's a lot to like, but I don't think he's ready for that true number 3 role. I think the Bears still need one more defensive end from likely outside of the organization. I just don't think Booker and Dominic Robinson and Daniel Hardy combined to be good enough for that role for this defense to be what they want it to be. And so they still got to see this spring and summer practices through, but that to me feels like the most likely spot the Bears still add an outside player. But Ben Johnson's been making it very clear that evaluation process is going to be a slow one and that they're going to take their time with it to try and be the most fair for those big players in the trenches that can't always show fully what they can do at a rookie minicamp. So we'll hear from Ben Johnson about how they're approaching that and why we may have to wait a little while to get any kind of definitive movement on the left tackle battle or where these defensive tackles end up in the pecking order. Next on Locked On Bears. We're all going to be eager to find out who's winning in the left tackle battle. Is it Krana Magaji or is it Azie Trapilo? Who's getting the first team reps? How are they rotating those reps? Who's getting those opportunities? And then on the defensive line, like how much is Shemar Turner rotating in there? What kind of, like is Zach Pickens with the third stringers? Is he with the starters? Like how are they keeping these guys in the rotation? Who's winning these battles? And Ben Johnson has been very clear to say, hey, there's no depth chart. Everyone is competing for every spot. But also, just because everyone's competing for every spot doesn't mean we're going to get instant answers for those competitions. I will say as a quick aside here, like not everybody's competing for all those spots, right? Like Joe Thuney is starting at left guard. There's no competition for Joe Thuney at left guard. Drew Dahlman is starting at center. Darnell Wright is starting at right tackle. Those guys are not in, as much as Ben Johnson says, everyone's got to earn their spot. Yes, but like Montez Sweat doesn't have to earn his spot. Grady Jarrett, Tremaine Edmonds, TJ Edwards, Jalen Johnson, those guys, Caleb Williams is not competing with Tyson Bagent for the quarterback one spot here. Like, you have to say that as a coach, and you can't give anybody any spot because I get it, but like, also, come on. We know that some people are not competing for their spots, and that's okay. They don't have to. They ever know. But especially those competitions in the trenches, Ben Johnson's kind of out here pumping the brakes on that and saying, listen, like, essentially, no one's winning a job on the offensive or defensive line, or none of these battles are ending, I should say, until the pads come on. And that means it's going to be a little while.
A couple more as you try to figure out the left tackle position, big picture. What do you hope happens over the next 6 weeks here as you try to get a feel for who fits where and who's the ideal?
Yeah, we're not earning jobs here this springtime. What I would like to see offensively, it's not just for the O-line, but we're still trying to comprehend this system. There's a lot. We've taught a big picture view really over the last few weeks. We haven't even formally installed a specific play and a formation all at once yet. We'll do that once we get to OTAs. So there's a lot that's going on in everyone's head right now. We've been focused, particularly in that room, about our fundamentals. What does a triple look like when we're working with the tight end? What's it going to look like on a dry block? When we're pulling, what do we want that to look like? And so that's been our focus. I really don't want to get too much into depth of what that personnel is going to look like. We just simply don't know. We'll find that out when we get pads on. You can't climb the depth chart in the springtime, particularly on O-line and D-line, if we don't have the pads on.
On the one hand, I believe him, and on the other hand, I don't know that I fully believe him there. I think publicly that will be the case, that yes, they're not going to announce a starter, they're not going to announce a winner. No one is moving up the depth chart without pads because you can't fully see what these guys do without pads on. However, I think you can see quite a bit without pads on, and you'll have a general starting point, an idea of who's in a better position and who's playing better, who's more talented than others, even if they don't have the pads on. Because like, to be realistic here, you don't go full pads in OTAs, and you don't go full contact, full pads in mandatory minicamp. And so if you were to take Ben Johnson at his word there, he would say no one climbs up the depth chart until training camp, and not even the start of training camp, because you don't put pads on until like the first week, like the second week of training camp. So no one climbs up the depth chart until after the second week of training camp. I don't find that to be true, at least in the trenches, even specifically. Like, I just don't think that's how it functions in reality. Like, maybe on paper, maybe the official depth chart, yes, but like the offensive line coach is going to be watching Ozzy Trapilo, and is going to be watching Karana Magaji, and he's going to watch how well they kick out of their stance and whose feet are more consistently under them, who's more balanced on their feet, and when they're working drills on bags, whose hands go in the right place, who's punching with the right timing and with more power, right? Yes, it's not the same as who's winning one-on-one reps against the defensive lineman who's also in pads. Like, there are some things you absolutely cannot measure and fully evaluate until the pads go on. But I think the way Ben Johnson talks there makes it sound like, well, we can't tell anything until the pads go on. And I don't think that's true either. I think they're not going to award anyone a starting job. They're not going to formally move anybody up or down. But even before pads go on, they're going to have a pretty good sense of like who's ahead of whom and how they visualize the depth chart coming together, even if there's not an official depth chart at that point. Like, they'll be able to tell before training camp whether they need to sign a third defensive end or not. They're going to be able to tell before training camp who's ahead in the left tackle battle. And then they'll put pads on and they'll confirm that. But I think they're going to go in, before the pads go on, they're going to go in with a pretty clear idea of what the depth chart looks like. And then the pads are kind of the final, like, check the boxes of like, yep, this is where they are. Or, oh, actually, it does turn out that once the pads went on, this one player got better with the pads on. And so now we can reassess that specific spot. But for the most part, they kind of already know what they're doing. Like, I think of it almost like the NFL draft process and the combine, where it's like, yeah, player, in theory, you should kind of already know your guy before you get to the combine, but then the combine can either confirm stuff or make you kind of check what you thought in the first place. That's sort of the same way. It's not a perfect comparison there, but it's more like a process comparison of like, yeah, you'll have a pretty good idea there. You can, even without pads, you can tell the difference between two linemen at the same position and who's doing better at the things you're asking them to do. Otherwise, like, why go over practice tape, right? Like the whole point is to help them all get better and to see who's improving, to see who the better players on your football team are. So, like, yeah, no one's climbing the depth chart on the O-line and D-line without pads on. I mean, I guess, but if that's the case, then is Azie Trapilo going to be your third string left tackle until training camp? Of course not. Is Shemar Turner going to be a third string defensive tackle until training camp? No. Like, these guys are going to quote unquote climb up is Luther Burden going to be a third stringer, right? Because your rookies will come in at the bottom of the depth chart because they're rookies. So are all these guys going to be third stringers, but they can't climb up the depth chart until the pads come on? Like, of course not. That's not functionally how it works. When they can always say, well, yeah, they're not moving up. Even if their reps are different at practice, like, there's a difference between the real depth chart and then the reality of how they're being used at practice, right? And so, like, maybe they're not actually physically moving up a depth chart, but at practice, they're getting more opportunities than other players and moving up their reps, that, okay, they're not moving up the depth chart, but they are, like, they're not physically moving up the depth chart, but they're functionally moving up the depth chart. Like, it's all semantics at this point. And I think that's part of what Ben Johnson is playing there, where he's like, he wants to keep up this idea and this culture and this mentality that, hey, everything is earned, nothing is given, and we got to be physical with the pads on. So, of course, he's got to say that, and I understand why he says that, and I don't think he's, like, intentionally lying or, playing dumb necessarily. It's just, like, he's got to say that because it's what he's supposed to say. But in reality, I think players will move up and down the depth chart. We just won't get a definitive left tackle answer for a while, right? Don't wait for updates at rookie minicamp, at OTAs or mandatory minicamp that say, oh, yep, this guy's clearly won the battle, because the battle won't truly be over until the pad's on. And yet there's only two real battles here, right? It's left tackle, and then it's how the defensive tackle room goes up. But, like, there's no real competition for the starting defensive end spot. It's just backups there. And there's no real starting spot anywhere else on the O-line. So it's just kind of how backups shake out in their reps. And that's never really going to be settled until the end of training camp anyway. So I don't think we're going to get big major defensive line or offensive line updates there. Maybe we can get a sense of, like, the wide receiver rotation and how far Luther Burden's working versus, Olamide Zaccheaus and Tyler Scott in there. Maybe at defensive back, the corners, with rookie Zay Frazier and Terrell Smith and Tyreek Stevenson, if there's any kind of rotation action there, or the number 3 linebacker with whoever's going to be next to Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards. If it's Ruben Hippolyte or Noah Sewell or Amon Mbagamiga, like, that's a rotation that maybe we can get a little bit more of a sense of. But I think a lot of this is sort of like head coach culture, gamesmanship stuff from Ben Johnson, and I'm okay with it. Like when I say I don't believe Ben Johnson there, I'm not trying to be critical of him. I'm just trying to sort of keep us reading between the lines and trying to stay one step ahead and not getting caught up in or not falling for, I don't know exactly the right words there, right? Like not getting caught up in missing the boat, missing the forest for the trees here, and kind of staying abreast of what's actually going on with the Bears. And sometimes taking the words at their face value aren't the perfect measurement of what's happening. And that's what the Locked On Bears podcast is here for, to help take you another step deeper into your Chicago Bears. So that's why we always break down everything coming out of rookie minicamp, and then when the veterans are working with them here soon with OTAs and minicamp, we'll have that all covered for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for a second listen, you can always check out Locked On NFL, Locked On NFL Draft, or Locked On NFL Scouting for even more football talk all year round. Or any of your other favorite teams have Locked On podcast shows for Locked On NBA Network, Locked On NHL, and Locked On MLB. All professional sports teams covered here, plus some college sports as well. So go make another Locked On podcast your second listen today. Come on back tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity to bear down.